I wanted to go through this and condense this down for just a couple minutes to hit some highlights that I want students to understand. And the analogy that we always used in those days is the highest quality equipment in the world isn't going to stay properly maintained by itself. You always have to do something to maintain. The most expensive equipment doesn't matter. The same thing with a legal entity. Legal structures require proper maintenance. And this is really the topic for a short discussion today. Let's say we were to create, or our attorneys or whoever, would create a really strong legal structure. It's got LLCs and corporations and trusts, and everything's all properly set up. Has a legal structure ever been pierced? And the answer is yeah, all the time. But I don't want to leave you there. I want to tell you that here's the reasons why there's pierced. It's always pierced because of 4 reasons, or maybe a little bit of each. Maybe it's a consensus of all of the legal. But here's why legal entities are pierced. Number 1 is because you're not keeping up your formalities. I'm going to talk about that. It could be because you created such personal insolvency that, I mean, you can't go down to the grocery store and buy I used to say a nickel candy bar, a $2 candy bar without using funds. When you've done that, you've gone too far, and the courts look at this and go, yeah, this isn't right. You have to have enough bills or enough, you have to have enough assets to be able to pay for normal things that happen in life. Maybe when you set up the legal entities, they were conveyed fraudulently. Maybe that's a reason why. And maybe because you're not keeping everything, maybe what you've done is you've created an alter ego of yourself. And so let's talk about these. The solutions for all of these things is to keep your corporate formalities, preserve your personal solvency, avoid fraudulent conveyances, and keep legal separation between your legal entities. And so let's talk about those individually one by one. All right. Formalities, and let's, if I put it all out on one little chart, it tends to be a little overwhelming. Oh my gosh, do I have to do all of this? And the answer is yes, but it's really not all that hard. What we're trying to do is we're trying to say, this is one legal structure over here, and this one is separate. If something happens in, let's say, LLC number 1, it has no effect on limited partnership number 2, or LLC number 3, or corporation number whatever. These are separate legal entities, and to do that, we have to keep separate formalities. So let's talk about how to keep these things separate. Let's start with formalities. What's going to be required in your business? Well, LLCs and limited partnerships require an internal document. For limited partnerships, it's called the partnership agreement. It's not filed with any state agency, but the strength of your limited partnership is going to come from that partnership agreement. LLCs have what's called operating agreements. I know it's all semantics, but it's called an operating agreement. That's the internal document we're not going to share with any state agency. It's internal, but again, that's where the strength of your LLC is going to come. Where I see this forgotten a lot is people file the articles of organization, so they've got permission from the state. They get an EIN number. Then they set up a bank account. Those are 3 of the 4 important steps to set up an LLC, but then they never come back and do an operating agreement. Therefore, you're left to rely upon the rules of the state in which you live, but there's no inherent strength inside of your partnership agreement. What happens if one of the partners gets out? What happens if one of the partners wants to take a loan? Or what happens to his interest when he dies? What happens to partner number 3 if they get a judgment creditor against them? What happens in all these situations? All depends upon your operating agreement. And way too many times I see limited partnerships without partnership agreements or LLCs without operating agreements. It's absolutely critical that those things be done. If you have a corporation, it requires that you have an annual shareholders meeting and an annual board of directors meetings, and you keep minutes at those. And nobody tells you that it can't be on a napkin. It has to be formally typed up and submitted, but it has to be in your corporate document somewhere that you had a meeting and here's what you discussed and who was in attendance at those meetings. For corporations, they require that you issue stock certificates. Now, that's not a hard thing. You can go to Microsoft Word. It's a free template right there on your computer. You just didn't look at it and know that it was there. But you issue stock certificates. You have corporations have bylaws. You have to adopt bylaws. Here's how we're going. Now, again, this is a bylaw or your corporate bylaws are also internal documents. They're important that you have, they're important that you keep, but they're not going to be submitted to any state agency. They will be subpoenaed in an IRS audit, or they might be subpoenaed in a lawsuit, but it's important that you keep them, but no government agency is not going to say, oh, you didn't do your bylaws. We don't do that. Most states require an annual filing fee for business entities. Business entities include corporations, limited partnerships, and LLCs. So keep up with those. If you don't, then go back and catch up those filing fees. And the states usually have a little bit of leeway and a little lenience if you've forgotten them for a year or two. But after a little while, they kind of give your name to somebody else, and you're in default. If you're in default, your asset protection and even your tax advantages go away because you're not keeping your formalities. There's a stock ledger that's required, and some states will require that you keep that stock ledger. Here's who we've issued stock certificates to. Some states will require that be kept with the Secretary of State. Most states have gone away from that, but check with your state to see whether they require that your stock ledger be kept on file with them. Tax ID number, almost every LLC, every corporation, every limited partnership is going to require a separate tax return. Well, what if I'm setting up 3 LLCs? Do I need 3 separate tax ID numbers? Yes. If you and your wife have triplets, that requires a separate social security number for each one of the kids. We're saying to the world, this is a separate legal entity, and yes, it does require a separate tax ID number. It may not require a separate tax return, but it should require a different tax ID number.